Welcome to Slow Medicine Radio. Our host is integrative medicine Dr. Michael Finkelstein. Michael offers medical advice from a holistic paradigm, including both medical and metaphysical philosophies from the full spectrum of human experience. Slow Medicine Radio offers fresh ideas on how to attain a state of wellness that seems distant given the limitations of today's medical paradigm. It introduces you to thought leaders who connect the dots between theory and practice, examining health from a broad perspective with regards to medical diagnoses, conventional and alternative therapies, healthcare policy, and related topics that warrant further thought and discussion. Slow Medicine Radio does not prescribe to take this or do that. Instead, it offers an open-minded, intelligent, and practical approach to living, resulting in greater health individually and collectively. Here is Dr. Michael Finkelstein, the founder of Sunraven, the home of slow medicine in Bedford, New York.
Welcome to Slow Medicine Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Michael Finkelstein, and we're here every Monday at 5 o'clock Eastern, 1460 AM, and worldwide at WVOX.com. And I speak to you each week about your health, but not from the typical, I'm a doctor, you're a patient, and here are the things that you need to do, and it's all about your body, but from the perspective that's much wider than that, as you heard in the intro, about health being something that is an amalgamation of all these different aspects of your life, including your physical body, but certainly your relationships and the way you feel and the way you can move through the world, not just with your body, but coming through the day, feeling like you're doing something meaningful through your life, certainly, and that this all comes together. I think in general we're challenged because there are a lot of things that are thrown at us, and there are a lot of ideas offered by many good, well-intended people about ways we can take care of ourselves. But my hope today in particular is to try to get something practical across so that if you're in fact struggling with any aspect of your health, that there's at least a next step, something that you feel actually hopeful about, that if you can pull off, that maybe this will be the day that something will dramatically change. So perhaps the title of today's show might be, how's your New Year's resolution going? It's mid-February, and at this point, I'm guessing that a lot of those resolutions that we made 6-8 weeks ago has gone by the wayside, and you may be feeling a little low and down, and the cycle keeps repeating. Although perhaps some of you might call in and share what is working. I certainly like to hear that as well. But I'd like to address the fact that we are often filled with good ideas, and the idea to implementation is often where we stumble. So let's talk about that today, you and I. The number is 914-636-0110. That's the number you can call in at any time while I'm sharing with you, because I'd really like to hear your thoughts, certainly your stories, any questions that you have, so that we can engage in a conversation, because conversations I might have with one person, I am absolutely certain will benefit many others. So if you're been reluctant to call in but have been listening over the past couple of months and have been thinking, gee, I wish I could ask him a question or share with him this story, this is a good day to do that. 914-636-0110. So let's get to this New Year's resolution and how's it going, with the assumption that it could be better. Not to get negative about it, but let's talk about it, what it is, which is that we often want to do things and it becomes challenging to figure out when to schedule it, how to make the adjustments. You know, this is real life. And to me, it's really important, because what you feel inside, what keeps coming back at you as a thought as to what you need to do for your own health and well-being, often is quite accurate. I have been taught by many people, both in my conventional medical training as well as when I went back to study integrative medicine, that a person's own intuitive belief and understanding of what they really need is probably very accurate. In other words, doctors might come up with a diagnosis to tell you what's wrong and why you're feeling the way you do, or somebody else around you might say, hey, gee, you need to do this or that. But when an individual has a strong sense of, gee, I really need to deal with this. Let's say I need to sleep better, I need to eat better, I need to move my body, I need to deal with stress. Often that's what your inner voice is telling you, and that may be the best message, and that may be the most important messenger, you, in other words. So you've got these ideas every year. They come up maybe several times a year, especially when you're not feeling right or you are dealing with something chronic. And, you know, you want to get something started. Maybe you do, but to sustain it becomes really challenging. That's what I want to talk to you again about. So the number, 914-636-0110. Let me start off with what I recently came to understand. Last week, I happened to have been invited to do a series of presentations at the oldest health resort in North America. The name of the place is Rancho La Puerta, which means the door. And it sits on the doorway, literally, between Mexico and the United States in Baja California, about 20 miles inland. So if you know where Tijuana is in relationship to San Diego, it's sort of in that line, a little further east in the mountains, not on the ocean. It was founded by an interesting couple in 1940. This goes back to essentially the beginning of World War II, when the founder, the male partner of the husband and wife team, his name was Edmund Seke, was a illegal alien, essentially, in the United States. His birth was in a country that ultimately became part of the Austrian Empire, and when Austria sided with Germany in World War II, his presence in the United States was not welcome, and he was told that he needed to get out of the country before June 1st or he was going to be deported. Doesn't that sound familiar? Anyway, he didn't really want to go too far because his wife, a U.S. citizen, her family moved to San Diego and they wanted to be as close. So they went as close as they could, but on the other side of the border. So they went to this border town, Tecate, Mexico. You may be familiar with it because Tecate makes a beer that some people know about. Anyway, so in that town, they founded a ranch. They actually acquired it. They started to rent a small adobe home, literally small, smaller than the studio I'm sitting in right now, and for $50 a year, and invited people who knew of this man, Edmund Seke, for his work in the healing arts. And he was really about balance. He was really about using nature as the most powerful healer, about getting people outside and in their body and moving and eating whole, fresh foods and farming. A lot of the things that you've heard me talk about here where I work at Sunraven in Bedford. Similar model. And they really became well known. And over the 75 years since its founding, have become the most highly regarded destination health resort in the world. And they sit, again, right outside of the United States. Well, anyway, I was invited there to talk about my work and talk about how slow medicine is applicable to the 150 or so guests that come for a week stay. And I shared, of course, a lot of the things that I'm talking to you about firsthand with them. But what I really want to relate to you is not what I was talking about, because that isn't necessarily what's so unique today, but what I thought about when I was hiking on the mountain that sits on that property. And so Edmund and Deborah Seke wanted to go to this place, not only because it was right on the border, but because it sat adjacent to a sacred mountain, Mount Kuchima, which is revered by the native peoples of the area as the most powerful place, they would say, in North America. And then a lot of ceremonies have been performed there over the years. We're talking hundreds, if not thousands of years. It was well known for its power. And one of the things that guests do when they stay at the ranch is to hike the mountain on various trails that have been established. And you leave just before sunrise. So we're talking about 6 o'clock in the morning. Go out on the mountain, which is full of granite boulders and scrub brush, very minimal plants, but in a landscape which is very unique, very beautiful, very clear. It had been raining the last couple of weeks, as you may know, in California and the West, so that has been good for the drought conditions. And so all these plants that had been suffering for the past 6 years or so started to bloom and grow. vigorously as they do because they take advantage of the intermittent rains. So it was a spectacular time, and I would climb the mountain. The hikes were 3 to 5 miles every morning. It would take about an hour and a half or so. And as I was ascending the mountain, I would watch the sunrise across the valley. It was quite beautiful. Colors, of course, only visible that time of the day, when the sun is rising and the sky turns all these interesting colors and there's no shadows yet. And it's really quite amazing, spectacular, uplifting in many ways. And the air was filled with the moisture from the night's condensation, which occurs when, because the cooling of the desert climate is such that whatever water precipitates. And so you're breathing this air deep into your lungs. But I would say there's something more that I was breathing than just the air. I was literally inspired at the level of my soul. And the hike went up and down this mountain. The path sort of wrapped around the waist of the mountain. It was really quite extraordinary experience. And it wasn't even that intense. It was a decent hike, meaning, there was some effort involved, but there were many flat sections so that I could really enjoy it. Then I would come down, and by the time I was down and would go to the breakfast dining facility and enjoy a breakfast, I would feel already warm, even though the air temperature might be in the mid-40s, and comfortable enough to sit outside in the rising sun. But my experience was, and what I want to say is that before 8 o'clock in the morning, I was already feeling amazing. That I had almost done all that I needed to do for the day in terms of self-care. I felt complete by 8. And the thought that I want to share with you today was, what if instead of all the, a lot of things that are on your to-do list about your diet, about, exercise, about stress management, whatever, but what if whatever you chose to do was simpler than that? What if your only objective was to get outside in the morning early, like around sunrise or shortly after, and watch the sunrise as the only thing you did? Now, you didn't even need necessarily to be terribly active. If you're limited in some way, and the best you can do is open the door and sit on your porch, or open the window and look at the sun, or take a walk around the block, then that, I would say, is fine. If you can do a little bit more, then I think the walking and the pushing yourself a little is even better, because the idea is not just to watch the sunrise, but to breathe in the air and to get this experience that I was just describing of feeling filled with something that really is only available early in the morning before the world really wakes up. Now, I know that for many of you, that means getting up a little earlier, or carving out that 15, 20 minutes of time, perhaps before, in the middle of whatever you got to do, like get the kids ready for school. Now, my suggestion is that you try to do that by 8 o'clock, that you're, with the simplest of effort, you've been inspired by the profound effects of the natural world. This doesn't require special sneakers. This doesn't require any equipment. This doesn't cost anything. The idea is to do this without any of those requirements, but just something that is so simple and free and available, but particularly powerful. Because this time in the morning, I think the Earth's energy is really remarkable. And for most people that I've ever spoken to over the course of my 56 years of living, when you get up a little earlier than usual and you watch the sunrise and you're outside and you're moving around, the day starts off so good. Maybe that's not practical for you to do during the week when you're working. But maybe you can find one day a week, like the Sabbath I talk about, where instead of sleeping in late, perhaps on that day you actually wake up earlier to get yourself out in a position to watch the sun. So the idea here is feeling great by 8, or feeling great before 8. And what if, that was something you can incorporate? I'd love you to call me, 914-636-0110. I'd love you to maybe share your reactions to that suggestion, your thoughts, especially the thoughts, not telling me, gee, that's a great idea, Michael, but what about the thoughts of what's difficult about that? So we can work that through, that you could share your questions about how possible, how you can make that work. Because I think this is how we can help each other as a community. We can figure this out. And on that note, as a community, what if you called right now 2 or 3 of your friends and said, I just heard this idea and I want to try it. And I know if I'm trying to do it myself, maybe, every day, every other day, I would wake up and second guess myself and put the covers back over my head or decide I have something more important to do. But if 2 or 3 of us got together and we had to meet somewhere, we had a commitment to each other, not just to ourselves, but to each other, we would carry ourselves for the team. This is where I think community can be really powerful. This is why community is one of the 7 aspects of the slow medicine wheel of health, one of the 7 key spokes of that wheel. Because when we try to do things on our own, I think it's actually more problematic. It's more difficult. But if we have a group of friends, people really close to us, what about one other person who lives with you? What about your daughter? What about, your aging mother? Maybe you could grab them and say, let's do this. Let's see if we can do this. Maybe just one day a week. Maybe this Saturday. Maybe this Sunday. Maybe we can do that. Of course, the alternative is the sunset, another powerful time of the day. But, because the sun sets and, just although the sunrise changes every day in terms of timing, the sunset usually is, in my mind, a little bit busier. There's still a lot more activity on the earth between 5 and 8 p.m., whereas 6 a.m., a lot of people are still sleeping and they're in their house. So it's a quieter time. Of course, the other benefit, although not quiet this morning, given the weather that we've been having over the last couple of days, I heard the songbirds. I had my window open because it was relatively comfortable last night to sleep with the window open. And so I was able to hear what was going on outside early in the morning. So in addition to our rooster, who is definitely on time, we heard other birds, songbirds, anticipating, I guess, spring. I think they're going to be in for a rude awakening because as we know, we're not there yet. But they were singing and obviously getting a little bit more active, which is where we're going to all be pretty soon. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. The number is 914-636-0110. We're going to take a break. I'm going to give you time to collect your thoughts. To write that number down again, 914-636-0110. And when we get back, we'll continue this conversation. You're listening to Slow Medicine Radio, and we'll be back in a minute.
You're listening to Slow Medicine Radio. You can find out more about the show and the work of Dr. Michael Finkelstein by visiting his website, slowmedicinedoctor.com. Slow Medicine Radio is sponsored by the Slow Medicine Foundation, dedicated to providing community-centered experiential and reflective learning for individuals, families, and groups, offering educational programs, events, and resources, as well as insightful health evaluations with customized medical guidance. Dr. Finkelstein works with his wife, Robin Queen Finkelstein, at their farm, Sunraven, in Bedford, New York. And they invite you to visit and take advantage of this unique resource, including men's and women's groups and couples programs. If you think about it, much of what we experience when we don't feel well is a result of the fast world and how it affects us. Therefore, if fast is the disease, then slow is the medicine. Visit Sunraven, the home of slow medicine in Bedford, New York. Go to slowmedicinedoctor.com or call 914-218-3113. And thank you for tuning in Mondays at 5 p.m. right here on 1460 WVOX. You're listening to Slow Medicine Radio. You can find out more about the show and the work of Dr. Michael Finkelstein by visiting his website, slowmedicinedoctor.com. Slow Medicine Radio is sponsored by the Slow Medicine Foundation, dedicated to providing community-centered experiential and reflective learning for individuals, families, and groups, offering educational programs, events, and resources, as well as insightful health evaluations with customized medical guidance. Dr. Finkelstein works with his wife, Robin Queen Finkelstein, at their farm, Sunraven, in Bedford, New York. And they invite you to visit and take advantage of this unique resource, including men's and women's groups and couples programs. If you think about it, much of what we experience when we don't feel well is a result of the fast world and how it affects us. Therefore, if fast is the disease, then slow is the medicine. Visit Sunraven, the home of slow medicine in Bedford, New York. Go to slowmedicinedoctor.com or call 914-218-3113. And thank you for tuning in Mondays at 5 p.m. right here on 1460 WVOX.
Welcome back to Slow Medicine Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Michael Finkelstein, and I'm talking about, that one little element that could make a difference in your life and want to suggest another. So one of the things that we often can do, when we wake up in the morning feeling not so good, when we don't maybe have the energy to get out, like I'm suggesting, before the sun rises, because some of us really need to sleep, or we need to rest, or we just don't have the will to sort of pick ourselves up and do that. Some people are, to some extent, struggling with a form of depression. I would say not necessarily clinical depression always, but just a low state of being that, there's a certain amount of negativity of thought that becomes a habit that weighs on people, that makes it hard to do. So I realize that this is, a lot of words, and sometimes it's hard. But I want to try to break through that to give you something simple enough to consider. And so the first, of course, is maybe you might say somewhat ambitious, which is to get up before the sunrise and watch the sunrise and breathe in the air and use the power of that energy. But the other may be to look at your glass. And what I mean by that is, a lot of people talk about whether the glass is half empty or half full. And for many of us, we might say, gee, there's barely anything in my glass. And I wrote a blog, part of the New Moon letter series that I write once every new moon. The next one coming up this Sunday, as a matter of fact, is the next new moon, February 26th. But the idea of me writing it on that schedule is to remind people of that rhythm and those cycles. But each time I try to offer something in a way like this, an idea, a suggestion, take it if you will. Of course, you don't have to. Maybe just read it. It's interesting, and you sort of hold on to the seed. Maybe one day you'll plant it. But the other part of this, which I'm getting to, is that one of the blogs I wrote was, reflecting on the glass half empty, half full question. And the title of it is, if your glass is half empty, get a smaller glass. What does that mean? That means that, it's all relative. And if we had less expectations, if we didn't have such a big glass that we felt needed to be so full or filled by so much, if we had more modest expectations, then relatively speaking, proportionally, we may feel more full. And that fullness, even though it may be smaller in absolute quantity, qualitatively can help us, because we know when we have that empty feeling, when we feel there's so many things not working, we're feeling worse, we're feeling sadder. Whereas if our expectation was, maybe all I can do every morning is look out the window and take a deep breath, but I'm grateful for being able to do that. There's something I think very powerful about that. I teach at Binghamton University. I teach undergraduates a course called Balancing Health and Success. The idea of the course is to help them when they are early in their lives on course to study and work hard to achieve, that they reconsider what it is that they're trying to achieve. In other words, what does that word success mean to them? And, often the initial answer is, well, I get a good job, I get well paid, I have the things that I want, I could afford, obviously, to treat myself now and then with things like a nice dinner or nice clothes or vacations. That's success. And a lot of that, obviously, as a concept makes sense, but is very materialistically oriented. When I push them a little bit further and I say, well, what if you had all the money in the world, but you had no friends, you had no family, you died, maybe you lived to be 99, a long, long life, but you had nobody around you at that time. How would you feel? And that they get to that pretty quickly, that, no, I guess success means, of course, having enough, but also having people in my life to share it, because what's one without the other? And that perspective is where I'm going with this idea that we may not have material wealth. We may not even have physical wealth, meaning that type of health, but we may have other things. And so I asked them, the exercise I asked them is, write a list of things that you're grateful for. The chapter in my book that relates to this is called Finding Health. When people see me, they list what's not working. what they're concerned about, what's the pains that they experience, the disease that a doctor told them they have, the discomfort, the worries. And so they quickly and easily list for me all of those. But then I ask them the same question. So I get it. There are things that are, upsetting you, hurting you, in your way, interfering in some way with your life. But can you tell me right now what's working? People struggle with that a little bit. They really don't often see where I'm going because their relationships may not be working. Their physical body may not be working. Their job may not be great. But then I help them drill down. So I say, well, do you remember, what you did yesterday? And they say, yeah, I remember what I did yesterday. I said, well, your memory is working. Do you remember memories of going to the beach when you were a child? Yeah, I remember that. Do you remember the last time you had a cold? Like an infection, like a virus. Do you remember that you recovered from that virus? Yeah, I recovered from that virus. In fact, last week I had the flu. I feel better now. You remember when you bit your lip and it was bleeding and it got all swollen and for a week or two it was painful. You couldn't eat so well, but now you can. Yeah, I got that. My body is healing. Did you eat dinner last night? Yeah. Did you digest the food? Yes. There are a lot of things in our body we take for granted, a lot of things in our life that we take for granted, like we can actually go to work. Even if we don't like our job, we have the means. We can get up and go. We can walk. We have enough funds to get there. We have some support. Maybe we hate our boss, but maybe we don't even like most of the people who we work with. But there is one friend that we have at work. There is one really nice, good person that we see every day. Maybe there have been tragedies in our lives. Maybe people have been lost to us, children even. But we have other family, other friends. Again, this doesn't mitigate the losses. I'm not going there. I'm not saying it's okay and that people should not grieve. But at the same time that we might grieve, there are factors in our life that can bring us joy. A lot of this depends then on what you pay attention to and perspective. So if an expectation set wasn't everything was always going to be good and working all the time, but that there would be a blend of things that were going to be painful and not as painful, things that would be joys and joyful memories, and those would last, and those would fortify us, and those would give us strength and hope, and we would prove to ourselves that we actually recovered from things over the course of our lifetime that while we were in it, we never thought we would. But here we are today. We realize that there are a lot of things working. And so bringing your cup down to size, I think, is a very important, I would even call it a practical exercise. Something, in my book, I call it a prescription for health. It's a prescription. I'm a doctor. I'm going to tell you the prescription. Think about your expectations and make adjustments. Maybe you don't believe it at first, but think about what you might teach your children and how you might share with them when they're younger what to expect as they grow older. You're not going to tell them that everything's always going to work out. You're not going to tell them that they'll never have pain. You're not going to tell them that you're going to live forever. So you're going to teach them practical wisdom, things that are true, some of which will include pain and discomfort along the way of life. But by sharing that with them, you're hoping to help them set up expectations. So one, they're not completely devastated when things don't work out, somewhat prepared, at least conceptually. Of course, we all have to learn through experience, and sometimes it's a very hard learning. But the other is, by sharing this with them, you help them set expectations that are realistic, and you're asking them, in a sense, to be grateful for what they do have, what is available to them right now, because that's where their energy comes from. That's where the light of life actually is now shining on them. That's where they're able to amass the strength to move forward and actually, at times, persevere through things that are more challenging. And so, first I offered you this idea of getting outside and feeling great by 8. But if that feels like it's too much, it's not something that you can do at the moment, then maybe what you can do is you can think about, well, what's in your way? And then you write that list of things that aren't working. And then right after that, You think about what is working. And you look for reasons to be grateful. You look and maybe see that, in fact, while there may be so many things that aren't working, there actually are so many more things that are. It could sound little at first. As I said, like you digest food, or you can move, or you can have a memory. One of the kids in the class wrote something funny. I could do this assignment. I think that was tongue-in-cheek. I think he was pushing back a little on maybe the little silliness in the assignment, but I think he got the point, and actually he was sharing it in a jovial way. And in fact, I would add to his list, he has a sense of humor. The idea is that we can do things, and that's a sign of our remarkable ability. And if we focus on the things that we can do often, that helps us in mind first, sort of realign, readjust, think more positively, and ultimately maybe actually trickles down to our energy, which includes our body. And then maybe weeks or months from now, you might be able to take that other seed and get outside and feel great by 8. The number is 914-636-0110. Again, invite you to call me, 914-636-0110. It's a day where we could reflect. It's a holiday, President's Day. Was, I think originally when I was growing up, sandwiched in between Abraham Lincoln and George Washington's birthdays. Now it's standardized and includes every president. Certainly honor those individuals who have done so much for us on our behalf, and it puts in frame, what we're experiencing now. Again, not to get political, but the idea that whatever your politics are, that's not an easy job to be the president of the United States. And we can see now more than ever the level of scrutiny is quite intense. Of course, we have high standards, and we want somebody who really represents the whole and moves us in a direction. But as you see, even with that, and the reason that it's so complicated and more complicated these days, I think is we have that high standard expectation. And as such, it's easy to set people up to fall short. I think a great attitude in general, again, whatever your politics are, is to look at things that are working. And of course, when there are things that you believe are not working so well, then we have a couple of choices, one of which is to get out there and do some of it, or change it through the processes that are available to us to influence how people work on our behalf. But we do have the means to do that. And that in itself is working. And so you can sit here and say, gee, the glass is half empty. Or we can adjust our expectations. One, so that we can be grateful. We can support those that deserve some support. But when those people fall short of our own views on how that should go, then we could do other things. We can support others who are going to make a difference. And in the nature of our democracy, the nature of community, the nature of cooperative societies, that's how this works. It doesn't mean that at any given moment, everything is just fine, because there's nothing like that in life. There's probably never been a time in your life where everything is fine. Everything. So, and in fact, sometimes at our lowest moments, the time we're in the worst pain, or we're the most afraid, or we're feeling the most lonely, that something most dramatic and most positive actually happened to us. Because sometimes we're in those low states, we're really open to receive something, some gift, some expression of love or whatever that gives us hope. And it's at those moments where we're very receptive that often things fall into place for us. There are many people who, report the love of their life appearing at their lowest point. Or just a common accident, like 2 cars colliding on the road, nobody badly hurt, but 2 people getting out, meeting each other in that strange way. Or people sitting on the train. Or people being delayed in airports and having no one to talk to except the person sitting next to them, who ultimately becomes a very important person in their life. These are the stories you hear every day. And they're born out of things that might be looked at and said, that's not working. You know, the infrastructure of the United States is terrible. Trains don't go on time. Planes, get hung up, waiting on the tarmac for hours and hours and hours. But there are people who meet their future husbands and wives that way. Or that people whose lives are saved because those delays are often about safety. So I think that, we can learn through our own experience in life. We're all capable, if we look at our own experience, to be great teachers. In fact, most people are. Most people who become parents have a lot to offer their children on virtue of just this common sense. It's really not something you need to read in a book. This is not something that requires anyone to prove to you in some ways, because when common sense is so prevalent in an opinion, and it resonates deeply within you as a deep truth, something that in your mind, as you think about it, is worthy of trying, and that's enough. That's enough. And ultimately, it's in your own experience that will lead to your the proof. So what if your experience was, over the next couple of weeks, you woke up at 6 o'clock, or at least you got outside. Maybe you're up earlier than that. You got outside when you're not usually outside then. And you just take a 5-minute walk, a walk where you can actually see the sunrise in some way, and breathe in that cold morning air and listen to the birds and feel the movement of really the lack of movement, the stillness on the earth in the early morning before everything wakes up. Listen to the birds waking. Think about all the people in all the houses starting to rustle around in bed, getting ready for their day. The enormity of it all. Just how awesome that is. Look at the buildings. Look at what humans have created. Even though we could look at what they've destroyed as a result of those physical creations, the buildings and the pollution, etc., there is something really dramatically awesome about how buildings get built, how we learn to use our tools and these materials to build what we have. And yes, we could be better with our facilities. We could be wiser in how we use resources on the earth. We can be cleaner. There are a lot of things we could do. And I certainly endorse all of that. But just for the moment of the early morning, without the judgment, be in the awesome. Be in the miraculous. Because this show is about health. And I think that's going to help your health. That's going to help you feel whole, connected. And maybe that will sort of rekindle the love affair you have with the planet, with humanity, with all that goes into what you are witnessing. To recognize that it, like you, are so precious and deserved of care. And if that's your experience before 8 o'clock in the morning, then I would believe that that day is going to be a very good day. And if you did that a couple of mornings, if you did it once, you can do it again. And if you kept stringing those together, how might that change the tenor of your life? How might that lead to an experience of living that took 10 or 15 minutes a day of virtually doing nothing that you haven't done before at some point or another? You just intended to do it and figured this out. Now, right, it might be an investment of some time. It might actually be, you might have to sacrifice something. Maybe you sacrifice a shower, or you sacrifice, going on the internet at 7 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock in the morning to see the news that early. In fact, this idea, I would say, is something that should be instituted before you turn on any news. Again, the idea is that you connect with the earth, you connect with all that energy before you get really engaged in your usual activities. in your work, in the busyness of life, the first thing is to be a human being as opposed to a human doing. So what would that take? I have a couple of more minutes. You can pick up the phone. The number is 914-636-0110 and share your thoughts. Again, the thoughts that I'd be particularly interested in is somebody who might say, gee, that sounds good, but. And I'd love to hear what the but is so that we could process that together and explore where the but comes from, who's that messenger that tells you you can't do this, where does that voice in your head reside? It's in all likelihood not your own voice, but a voice of somebody like your mother or your father who told you you can't, something that has embedded itself into your mind and has fooled you to think that that's your own belief system. I know that several of you, of course, can't get mobilized physically. You know, you may have limitations. You may not live in a place where it might be safe to walk outside at 6 o'clock in the morning by yourself. I'm sure that's a good excuse. Then again, if you looked at your window at 6 and you saw people in your situation walking outside at 6 o'clock, then you realize, well, that's then your opinion, not everyone's opinion. So I'm not telling you to jeopardize your health, but again, I'm asking you now to think about whose voice is that? And why the negativity? Why the fear? Why the anxiety? That's a subject, by the way, for a whole nother show, which is, where do we get these thoughts of worry and concern? Some of which, of course, are practical. Some of us have had trauma or experiences where we've been hurt by others or hurt in accidents, and we don't want to repeat those. So we're careful. But you realize that when we're careful, when we live our lives that way, where we're looking down the street and we're afraid somebody might pop out, or we're worried about a car hitting us, or getting a cold because it's windy, if this is our dominant thinking, even if that's backed by experience and a certain amount of truth, that anxiety, that fear stimulates in us immediately, even before it happens, even when it never happens, because we don't do that. We don't go outside, we don't get a cold. So we think. But the fear, looking outside and thinking about going outside and worrying about it, already immediately creates a sympathetic nervous system response, which is inflammatory, which impairs our immune reactions, which contributes to ailments like aches and pains and heart disease. So those thoughts themselves have power. If they become habit, then those habits have a powerful effect on our being and how well we do or don't do. And so it's important for each person then to reevaluate periodically, are the things that I'm concerned about, are the things that provoke fear and anxiety in me all really justified? And if they're not, just because they're not justified doesn't mean you sort of say you can bat it away. Sometimes you realize they keep coming back, which means they're embedded deeply in your psyche, which may mean that they're somehow associated with something that was traumatic. So this is a protective mechanism. So you can't convince yourself not to be afraid necessarily. But you could take the comment, which is that maybe these things are based in something else other than true fact. They're just, an anxiety that somehow was embedded, to work on anxiety as a general syndrome. And one of the things you can do is to breathe, is to be inspired, is to think of the positive, is to change the size of your cup and the expectations, and find a way to live with a slightly different set point, even if it's slight, even if it's just very, very slight. That difference can be quite important in terms of the quality of your life. And ultimately, when something affects the quality of your life, it has a lot to do with also the quantity. Because if you're feeling better, less anxious, and your cells are bathed in less of the stimulants that are debilitating over time. And so this is how I reverse the medical approach often in the conversation, is to not deny the value of looking at physical health and quantitative reasoning, but is to think about the opposite, which is that qualitative value can actually have impact in the quantitative. And one of the qualities we can get, so this is not exercise early in the morning, it's just to go outside and be inspired by the rising sun and the cool morning air. And just the knowledge that you did this for yourself. How uplifting would that be? I think for many people, this would be the reaffirmation of the fact that you deserve care and that the first person who's going to care for you is going to be yourself. And when you send yourself that signal, it resonates very deeply. You know, often people might complain that people don't care about them, like their spouse or their children or their parents. And that might be true. However, often when that's repetitive and we look at ourselves and we ask ourselves the question, do I really care about myself? Or am I repeating messages about myself like I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not good looking enough? Am I repeating things like that, then how does that reflect my level of care for myself? So this is a time for, rather than debate it, to figure out where it comes from, is to get outside. And then after you get outside, then just to be, just to receive it, just to open your heart, open your mind, open your lungs to take that all in. And that's the idea of feeling great before 8. So a closing thought or two. Last week, you may have heard the replay of a show that I did with some young adults that were from the Bronx High School of Science and Mathematics. The title of the show was The Paradox of Our Times, Reflection on Societal Health from the Heart of the City. And the idea that inspired the show was the fact that often we think that there must be really studied scientists and experts, people who are older, to look at our culture, our society, because, you know, we all sort of know, we all say at one time or another that, you know, our world is sick, our society is sick, it needs help, so many problems. And we look to our leaders, we look to the elders. We often hope that they're wise. In fact, we know sometimes our hopes are not met by reality. Part of our expectation set, by the way, is, you know, that as people get older, they get wiser, they get more capable, doing things like that. So we're let down. But another expectation we hold that I think is unfair and unwise is that young people don't have much to offer yet in terms of how they can contribute that way, that they have to grow up, they have to experience before they could really get themselves involved in a meaningful way. But the inspiration for the show that was recorded on January 30th this year and rerun last week was to invite young people, these are teenagers from the inner city, to share with us their observations and thoughts. And I don't know about you, but I found that their words were remarkable. Without that much experience, without years and decades of experience, without being told the answers, these young people came up with such practical and loving wisdom. Again, it seemed like it was precocious. It came before its time. It should not have been young people who told us this, but it reinforced what a lot of us, I think, intuitively understand. That the answer to our problem isn't necessarily a complex solution only. Yeah, we may need to affect the infrastructure. Yes, maybe political leadership maybe needs to help all people have access to the right types of education and the careers, training, and the opportunities in the workplace, and healthcare. Yes, that's all true. But these young people were not suggesting the answer from that position. They kept using the word love and respect and compassion. the words love, respect, and compassion. What they see, what they experience, is that people are bypassing the essentials in favor of the extraordinary and the complex. Love, respect, and compassion are free. And if that's what you thought about in the morning when you woke up, about yourself, that you felt worthy of love, that you loved yourself for all that you've been through, you respect that in your mind right now is the desire to improve. You accept, therefore, in some ways, anything you've done in the past that may have been previously called a mistake. And they have compassion for anything that didn't work out, that maybe you did out of naivete or immaturity, or at some earlier time out of something impulsive or even negative in terms of behavior, but that you had compassion because we're all human beings learning. And you applied that to yourself on this walk before the sunrise. Well, that's my thought, the final thought for today. I hope this helps you feel great before 8. I'll be back next week to talk more to you on the subject of slow medicine and healthy living. Until then, be well.